English translation, 497th contact. Saturday, 17th July 2010, 14:12 hours.
Because we still have to concrete the last two pieces of the retaining wall underneath the parking lot. Freddy called me to check the reinforcement, which he is welding together with H-iron girders and a reinforcement net. When that is done, we can pour the bottom outlet columns in concrete, and then we have to put formwork on the whole thing so that we can concrete the retaining wall. Freddy's work is in perfect order as usual. I also checked the low retaining wall in the water canal, which we finished concreting last night on the slope on the left side of the road. Greetings, dear friend, and also a warm welcome.
Greetings also to you, Edward, my dear friend. I was not long in waiting, for I was dealing with this. As you note here, it is a statement by Quetzal regarding the primordial marine animal Liopleurodon. What is that all about?
It is a question that was asked to Christian Frainer via the forum. You take from this excerpt from the 223rd contact conversation on Sunday the 1st of May 1988, our speech at that time. Then I have one last question for today, after which we can turn towards the private matters. Do you know which predator on Earth has ever been the largest? By that I mean during all times up to the very beginning, when the first creatures lived on Earth, in the air or in water.
The greatest predator of all times lived in the primeval oceans. A creature that grew to a length of up to 32 meters when fully grown, weighed up to 185 tons, and had fins up to 7 meters long. However, the average length of these huge creatures was about 25 meters, with fins 3 to 4 meters long and weighing about 150 tons. In the future, paleontologists, etc., will find clues for this creature on Earth, after which it will be called Liopleurodon, as I know from a future study.
It has been claimed that Liopleurodon was already found in the year 1873 and named so. This is probably correct, but apparently it was not understood, probably due to a lack of intelligence, that Quetzal said, as I know from a future view. This meant for me that he was reciting his information from a future view that someone before him must have made. But I did not know when this was, and I also did not ask for it. With regard to the cattle Liopleurodon, however, I have now looked it up and found the following description on Wikipedia on the internet.
This is correct, but also what Quetzal said with sentence 85, even if this seems confusing. When Quetzal said,
In the future time on Earth by paleontologists, etc., clues will be found for this being, after which it will be called Liopleurodon, as I know from a future view. Then his statement is a recitation of a record of my father's faith, which he wrote down in 1724.
This was familiar to Quetzal from learning processes. At that time, my father was responsible for carrying out various future studies on Earth with regard to future, scientific factors and paleontological findings, etc. So he also saw that in future time remains of Liopleurodon will be discovered, which he recorded in his annals with the words Quetzal mentioned with the sentences 82 to 85, which Quetzal recited, whereby sentence 85 is particularly important according to your explanation. In future time, paleontologists, etc., will find clues for this being on Earth, according to which it will then be called Liopleurodon, as I know from a future view. So the first part of the statement corresponds to a recitation from my father's record, while the as I know from a future view are Quetzal's own words.
That's how I understood the whole thing back then, what I also told Christian. Unfortunately, it is always the case that certain people are constantly working on it to find contradictions in the contact reports, so that I can be accused of lying and cheating. Therefore, unfortunately made statements sometimes have to be raised and clarified again as questions. This is precisely because the crooks, who diligently search for contradictions, cannot read correctly and cannot think logically. so they do not understand certain sentences and statements, because they cannot understand and also cannot combine the ways of presentation and pronunciation. But now I have a question concerning my family coat of arms. Because there is, besides the Maltese cross and 3 green leaves at the lower edge of the coat of arms, also a wooden angle, which covers everything. It is known to me that this angle symbolizes the carpenter's craft, but I do not know in which connection it stands. The Maltese cross, as I understand it, goes back to the family tree of the Meyer of my line, which according to your clarifications originally goes back to Malta and Amalfi, as well as Jerusalem. The 3 green leaves on the lower edge of the coat of arms, on the other hand, indicate dairy farms and manor administrations as well as flower arranging. But what does the carpenter's angle refer to?
It refers to the fact that in early times your ancestors were also carpenters, in addition to the tasks of the court administration, school science, dairies, and the Maltese affiliation. My latest research has shown that this craft was also practiced by your former personality Medger from Amalfi, whose family tree I could trace back again more than 860 years. Whereby I also found out that in this family tree lineage, carpenters appeared again and again. The oldest person, as I fathomed up to now in this lineage, was a man named Dyson, who in Hebrew language, however, was called only the preacher, thus herald, because he was a family-related wandering preacher who also did carpenter's work. The Jewish human beings, however, did not pay attention to his prophecies, for the teaching of the prophets which he proclaimed was not heard by them. So, after his passing away, he sank into oblivion, after which his wife and children moved to Jerusalem and later to various other places. From this line also emerged your former personality, who became known as the merchant and carpenter Medger of Amalfi.
Man, this is all kinds of stuff. Are you still working on my family tree?
That is the case, yes.
I am curious to see what else comes of it. But something else. It is now the middle of July, and your prediction that the flow of oil in the Gulf of Mexico has been stopped for the time being has come true. This was confirmed in the media, where it was said that about 600 to 700 tons of petroleum had flowed into the sea.
This is a lie, because since the 20th of April 2010, around 1,261 tons of petroleum have entered the Gulf of Mexico as a result of the accident. This is what our very precise investigations have revealed.
This is about 100% more than is being lied about. And I think that your investigations are very precise.
You can actually assume that.
It is now more than 50 years ago that Oskit gave me a prediction regarding the assassination of Stalin. I copied the corresponding passage from her explanations, because once again I was asked what Stalin had been poisoned with. But I have no knowledge of this, so I could not answer the question, which is why I ask you what Stalin was killed with. The same question also applies to Pope Paul VI, as well as to Pope John XXIII, Abdel Gamal Nasser of Egypt, and King Paul I of Greece, of whom your daughter Simya Say said that they too were respectively murdered by poison.
Pleiadian Pleer contact reports, conversations, Oskit statements. The 3rd of February, 1953, Volume 1, pages 314 to 315, sentences 159 to 160 and 167 to 171.
The inevitable events of the future will take place with such absolute precision, as will the events of the past, for which I would like to explain that the events of the future will already begin in the near future, with the murder of Joseph Stalin with poison on 5.3. 1953 in Russia, by order of internal party elements. The reason for the poisoning will be the only known Zionist-friendly attitude of Stalin, which in the following decades will also turn into Zionist hostility by neo-Nazi elements worldwide. As with Stalin, the same poison that evaporates very quickly from the body will be used to assassinate Pope John XXIII in 1963, who will hold his office for only a very short time. But his successor, Pope Paul VI, will also be eliminated in the same way, by cardinal machinations in collaboration with anti-Zionist Jewish extremists who have already forged their murderous intrigues at this time and are already setting things in motion. Greece is also already destined for an assassination of a head of state, for the future indicates that King Paul VI will die the same poisonous death on 6.3. 1964, as all those already mentioned. His successor will be named Konstantinos, but only 3 years later, due to his childlike incapacity as head of state and exploiter of the people, he will be displaced for all time by a revolutionary military regime. Egypt will not be spared either, for in the mid-1970s, a dictatorial statesman by the name of Abdel Gamal Nasser will be deprived of life there by poison, just as years before his friend, the Emir of Kuwait, who will die of poisonous death in 1965, was also deprived of life by the hand of his own relatives.
Pleiadian Pleer Contact Reports, Conversations, Volume 2, pages 214 to 215, 55th Contact Report, the 14th of June, 1976, sentences 79 to 80.
Good. Pope Paul VI, 2 years after his appointment by a Vatican Council decision of the Catholic bishops and cardinals, was secretly recognized as being alien to their purposes, which means that he was not suitable for their unfair power-hungry purposes, which is why it was secretly agreed that the superior pastor should be put to death by the hand of assassins and replaced by a double, faithful to the bishops and cardinals. So Pope Paul was murdered by poison and replaced by a cardinal of striking resemblance.
Obviously, at that time there was a boom in the use of poison to send popes and those with state power to the afterlife.
That is correct. Because at that time there was an upswing or boom in poisonous murders in this respect, whereby not only popes and heads of state were murdered with poison, but also many human beings without high ranks and ministries. A great many were murdered only for the sake of the legacy, respectively, the inheritance, which is also still often the case today, without the passing away of the persons concerned being recognized as murder. This also happens in your home country, Switzerland, where the number of people murdered varies between 200 and 400 per year. In Germany, as we know from our investigations and observations, the number of people murdered in this connection is estimated at over 4,000. Stalin was murdered with a rodenticide, with a chemical agent to control mice and rats, etc. The poison is known as warfarin, which is a blood-thinning, odorless and tasteless poison that causes intracranial hemorrhaging, that is to say, bleeding in the brain, respectively, the skull, the gastrointestinal tract, and the urinary tract. This strong poison can also be absorbed through the skin pores and through breathing. The administration of the poison caused a very strong cerebral hemorrhage in Stalin, which, explained in simple terms, resembled the symptoms of a stroke. The authorship and execution of the murder can be traced back to the Soviet Secret Service, and in particular to the head of the Secret Service, Larentin Beria, as well as to the political high-flyer Nikita Khrushchev, who succeeded Stalin. Pope Paul VI, John XXIII, Abdel Gamal Nasser, and King Paul I of Greece were murdered in the same way.
Simyase said then that the poison was not detectable in the body after the murder.
At that time, it was indeed still difficult to detect the poison in the dead body, because on the one hand, it largely evaporated, and on the other hand, the persons responsible for the murder strictly prevented the possibility of detection.
I can well imagine, because the killer pack around the world has never let anyone look at their dirty cards. But can you explain something about the poison warfarin, respectively about its effects, please? Because surely it is not limited to causing only death.
This is indeed so, because the pure active substance of the poison is not only highly toxic and deadly for human beings, but also for all mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, fish, etc., and all animals, as well as for water and earth organisms. Minimal amounts of the poison also have teratogenic effects. These occur as damage to the fruit respectively, the offspring of human beings, animals, creatures, and plants. The poison damages the fruit in the womb, thus causing mutations and physical crippling of the offspring, as well as brain, consciousness, and mental damage, etc. The inability to reproduce, respectively, infertility, can also occur.
Thanks for explaining. As you know, I wrote the book Education, and I was careful to describe education in relation to normal human beings. I deliberately refrained from talking about those who are not educable due to their genetic predisposition, because these are special cases, so to speak, which belong in the strictest psychiatric treatment. By this I mean those uneducatable human beings who are born psychopaths and live out their psychopathy from an early age until old age. Can you say something about these psychopathic born, that they are usually not educable? It would be good to make the matter understandable.
If I should not become too detailed?
This is not necessary, because a brief explanation is enough.
In congenital psychopathy, the genes are the main reason for the appearance of disorders. It must also be taken into account that not all those who are addicted to psychopathy are violent, because in addition to the violent, there are also those who appear to be absolutely normal, lead a bourgeois life, and are not very conspicuous among their fellow men. Only when they degenerate for some reason, which need not be the case, is their psychopathic nature usually recognized. In some human beings, brain tumors, false and brutal upbringing, military or terrorist, as well as religious and sectarian drill and severe head injuries can also be the trigger of psychopathy, which we call secondary psychopathy. We call congenital and genetically determined primary psychopathy. This form is already evident in infancy, when the child shows antisocial behavior at a very early age, rebelling against everything and everyone, whereby no admonitions or measures have any valuable results. Already at an early age, and the older they get, a numbness as well as an insensitivity solidifies in them, which of course carries over into adulthood and makes them full-grown and very often violent, dangerous, and unscrupulous psychopaths, who also do not shrink from multiple murder. Such psychopaths were Hitler, Stalin, and practically all the others since time immemorial, who played similar sad roles. It is to be said, however, that not all human beings with a genetic predisposition become degenerate psychopaths as a result of their psychopathic disposition or their wrong upbringing. In spite of everything, understanding, reason, and logic can register their good values, which, if they are used, can also neutralize genetic damage, just as a good upbringing can do, so that even a human being with a psychopathic predisposition can lead a completely normal life.
Thank you also for that statement. Then I have no more questions today.
Then I would like to discuss two more things with you, which are important and what you need to be oriented towards. Then I want to tell you briefly what our language experts have to say about the infant language English. After that, I want to leave,